everybody, to another episode of our live podcast, the 10X Go to Market podcast. Super excited to have Brian here, who is, I think his title here on the podcast is like not doing it justice. Enterprise AE doesn't cover all the things that he does, which we'll be getting into today. Super excited to have Brian on to share all of his sales secrets and give us a real masterclass on how he's figured some stuff out about prospecting with signals, how he's using AI, how to do really great discovery. If you have questions for Brian, please put them into the chat. And please introduce yourself in the chat as well, so Brian knows who he's talking to. Um, well, welcome, Brian. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today. I'm going to do a quick intro and then I'll kick it over to you to dive a little bit deeper into your background. But you're currently an enterprise AE at Gong. And like I said, that doesn't really cover all that you've accomplished. You also have 90,000 followers on LinkedIn, which is insane. And you've built a sales consultancy business and training business where you're open sourcing some of your secrets and helping other sellers along the way, which I think is super cool. Brian, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What did I miss in that brief introduction?
Well, that was an amazing intro. Thanks so much for having me, Sandy, and super excited to be on the podcast slash AMA with Pocus as well. Been looking forward to this the past couple of weeks. But yeah, in terms of introductory background, I stumbled into sales. Probably like a lot of people on this call today that are listening. I actually started out as a marketing major at Indiana University, and somebody that I was in class with was starting to tell me about this sales workshop thing and trying to get me to come out for a meeting one day. And I, on a whim, decided to join and ended up taking an internship through that workshop. Went to a career fair a year later and kind of stumbled into tech sales after starting more like an outside sales, like travel related role, and been fortunate enough to been in tech sales the past 8 years. I was at Bright Edge for a little over 3 years, and I'm just coming up on 4 years with Gone.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about at what point you decided to start creating content on LinkedIn and why did you start sharing, and then how did you get such explosive growth there?
Yeah, it was on a whim a little bit. I'd never shared content when I was at Bright Edge for my first 3 years, and I actually never posted my first year at Gong either. I just started sharing content about 2.5 years ago. I think for me, I saw other people at my company, Gong, like Amit Bendoff, our CEO, Udi, who's our CMO. There's another AE, Sarah Brazier, that some folks might have followed as well. They were all sharing their content, and I think I saw it from leadership top down, and maybe I was a little bit scared at the time, but seeing them kind of lead by example and just sharing a little bit about their journey on a whim, I just decided like, hey, I was gonna put myself out there a little bit more, share once a week at first, just like what was working well, what wasn't working, kind of like my overall journey. And I slowly ramped that up to 2 times a week, then 3 times a week, then 4 times a week, and now I post daily as well, and created a company off it as well.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Was it initially motivated more by wanting to use social as a channel for selling? Like, was it part of your social selling kind of workflow, or was it just simply like a desire to share what you were learning with other sellers?
Say a little bit of both. I definitely had like some aspect from a social selling. And I think what I actually found initially was I wasn't as successful from a social selling perspective just because like every account, at least at Gong, is pretty much assigned. So in the examples, I did get like an inbound lead or somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn. Like normally I'd have to look up that account then and pass it off to whoever, owned that account or company. As I can only target, who's on my list and in my territory. So, but I did think of it as a good way to kind of engage with folks that, maybe I got off a prospect call an hour ago. I add them on LinkedIn. And then if they're going to follow me over time, like they're going to see a steady drip of my content, what I'm sharing. And I think anything to get them to think about your company or you as an individual for a minute or two between calls in a positive light is a big win.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a seller's job is always to stay top of mind and also to add value wherever you can. And I think that's what you're able to do once you're consistently posting on social you're adding value, you're staying top of mind, and that I'm sure helps a ton with your prospecting goals.
Yeah, it's helped a lot more over the past year or 2 as I've built it up and gotten more of a following to it, where it's been pretty cool the past year, even just I might be reaching out on a cold call or a cold email, and to have somebody respond and kinda lead with like, "Oh, I follow you on LinkedIn," or, "Hey, I've seen your content before on Twitter," or something else is definitely turned into a big asset as well. So I've seen the reward pay off from it, but it definitely is a long game. I think with like building up your brand and online presence, it's about the consistency and discipline of it. You're not gonna go viral overnight. You can't outsource that work to AI agents or anything else. It takes some of the boring work of writing posts on a Sunday and scheduling them out or doing them on days that you might not want to or feel like you're too busy to, but it does pay off over the long run.
I love that point. I think, especially with AI being kind of a cheat code for a lot of people. I've definitely seen an uptick in content that I just think is, like, very obviously written by AI, and I just start to ignore it. And so when you come across something that you can tell somebody really thought about, they wrote it themselves, and, it's clearly based on things that they have experienced, it it's what stops the scroll and what you actually, like, start to read. You mentioned consistency and having some system set up and making sure that you're, making time. What does that look like for you? How do you manage to post consistently?
Yeah, for me, it's about writing in off hours because, an example of a day like today, I think I've had 8 or 9 meetings so far, like, there's no way at 8:20 in the morning would I have time to just like, "Oh, I'm gonna write a LinkedIn post," and, take 20 minutes, and I'm behind on emails, behind on Slack, trying to prep for my meetings ahead. So for me, what that system turned into is every Sunday, I'd sit down for about an hour, get some Starbucks or coffee, put some headphones on, I'd write out 5 posts. That way, I'm just in that mindset of, like, writing. I'm not there's no other distractions, no context switching. You could just as easily do that on a weekday night or weekday morning. I think just, like, off hours is usually best when you're not getting pinged with a lot of different notifications, either with friends or with work. And then for me, I don't actually use any, like, scheduling app. I know I referenced scheduling them out, but I basically just write down next to the post, like, "Oh, I'm gonna use that Monday. I'm gonna use that Tuesday." And then that morning of, I just copy it, I paste it into LinkedIn, and I'm ready to go. That way, I don't have to, spend 20 minutes writing a day of, and I can if I do have the time that day, I can engage with other people on my feed. I can like other posts. I can comment thoughtful things on other people creating great content as well.
Yeah. You make it sound really simple. But I don't think it's that simple that everyone can do it quite as well as you do, but, definitely encourage, folks in the audience to think about social as part of your overall kind of, like, prospecting workflow, especially because all the other channels are harder to get people's attention, and the more you can build a brand for yourself, and make your like you said, make your company more top of mind, it's gonna be easier to, like, break into those accounts and get somebody to actually respond to you.
Yeah, and I think the biggest misconception people have is like, "Well, I don't know what I would post," or like, "I'm not a number 1 performer," or "I don't feel like I have the credibility." Like, I wasn't a top performer either when I started posting. I had a good first year at Gong, but I was still somewhat new to my org. I think if you kinda just zoom out and think about yourself and your role, I guarantee you there's someone a step or 2 behind in their career, whether you're a first-time AE and there's maybe an SDR that's trying to get to that level, or you're an SDR and there's someone in college that's considering going into that profession. Like there's someone a couple steps behind you, and I guarantee you've learned valuable lessons. It's really just taking the time to think about it and like what some of those lessons are. And you can post about your failures, like what didn't work that day when you made 100 activities and landed 0 meetings, or it can be celebrating a win and, what went right in one of your deals or accounts or prospects. So I think just sharing like your authentic journey is the best way of going about it from the onset. And over time, you can kind of iterate from there.
Such a good point. I think we can often overcomplicate things and get too in our head about it and want perfection before you start posting things. But I think it's just you, as long as you're doing it and you're putting in the work consistently, it's kind of like we're working out. Like you're not gonna see results in the first, like, 2 weeks, and at that point, if you're, like, on the scale and you're like, "Nothing's changed, I should just quit." I think content is the same way. You're not gonna see results immediately, and you don't think anything's working, and then, just that consistency of doing it will eventually pay off. Switching gears a little bit, I wanna talk about sales process. In the prep work for this, we talked a little bit about kind of like what the overall process looks like for you, how you think about mapping your accounts, thinking about things like ICP fit, what signals you're using to prioritize where to focus. I think this is a like, huge topic for a lot of folks listening. I think everyone's trying to figure out like, what is that key to figuring out prioritization of my accounts, and how do I know who to reach out to and when to reach out? So would love to hear about how you're thinking about that. What signals are you thinking about when you're prospecting into your book? How are you prioritizing accounts? And then, are there specific frameworks that you're following?
Yes, yes, and yes. I'll dive in. I get all starts. I love the topic because it all starts with your territory and your accounts and where you're gonna spend your time. Again, zoom out for a second. If every seller has 40 hours a week and they're working, 49 weeks of the year, like there's some sellers that get insanely more done in those 49 weeks and those 40 hours per week than others. And it's all about spending your time with the right accounts and the right people within those accounts. So it's absolutely worth it. Like at the start of a new year or when you have new accounts or new territories, like block off time, like do that in depth research and make sure you have a really good plan of attack. For me, my strategy at Gong and my prior company has always been I want to put like 80% of my time into my top 20% of accounts. So just as a ballpark, if I had 1,000 accounts, which I don't, I wanna target just 200 of them, but, like, go absolutely all out at those top 200 accounts where, like, 80% of my time and effort is towards those. Likewise, if I have 100 accounts, right, I wanna just target 20 and go absolutely all out at them, like my, life depends on it or my job does. So within how I determine that, I think first off, it's about doing account research and account tiering where I bucket them into tier 1 accounts, tier 2, and tier 3. I'll put like 5% of my accounts in tier 1, 15% in tier 2, and like 80% in tier 3. And it probably sounds alarming for a lot of people, kind of that discrepancy, but I want to be super, super picky with the accounts that I absolutely go all out at. For my tier 3 accounts, those might be like, hey, it's not that great of a fit, or I've identified that even if I did land an opportunity, it would be a smaller deal size because there's a small number of users or they're a smaller company, whatever the criteria is for how you go about landing new business deals or expansion plays as well. And then within those tier ones and tier twos, what I'm using to determine is it goes back to those two pieces. It's ICP, which is your ideal customer profile. In layman's terms, it's like how good of a fit is that company for your solution or offering. So for an example with Gong, like a SaaS company that's on Salesforce CRM, perfect ICP fit. A lot of our customers look and feel like them. I know that they could benefit if they've got a chief revenue officer, an SVP of sales, a sales team versus like a hospital. I've never heard of a hospital using Gong. So if I had that as one of my accounts, I'm probably going to mark them more as a tier 3. The other factor I look at that I alluded to was size of prize or SOP. Size of prize is like your quick ballpark at like, if you did land that software company that's on Salesforce CRM, like, would it be $1 million deal potential or would it be a $10,000 deal potential? And to understand that, you need to know how your company charges in terms of pricing. Is it price per user? Is it consumption model? Is it a flat fee? All of them would be the same. So it's me doing my research. When I pull up each account in about 2 minutes, my goal is for each account to understand, hey, is this a tier 1? Is this a tier 2 or a tier 3? And I'm going to spend 4, 5, 6 hours going through all my accounts to kind of bucket them into those three groups before I then dive into tier 1 and tier 2 to really attack.
Mhm. So repeat that back to you, and I love the clarity of your framework. Um, you're putting 5% in tier 1, 15% in tier 2, and then the remaining percent in tier 3. And the things that you're looking at are ICP fit. So that's just, are they a good fit for the company? It's usually things like firmographics, like size of company, industry, just things that are like either true or they're false. And then you're looking at size of prize. What based on your based on your pricing model, like, what would be the potential deal size here? And then, how are you also looking at things like engagement and signals of like, oh, 5 people from this account downloaded content or they attended a webinar? Are you also looking at that in your tiering?
A bit, yes. I'd say I look at that loosely, like, "Hey, have we had prior opportunities with them? Have they received funding? Are they growing?" Those types of signals, the previous users, to determine, I think, kinda gut check me, like, "Hey, if they've had a bunch of opportunities and they went far, like, it's probably a pretty good fit. We just weren't able to win the business for some reason," and vice versa. If they've, been around for 10 years as a company and never spoken with us, like, that could raise a red flag, like, why they might not be a good fit in most scenarios. But I actually use a lot of those signals more to determine, okay, once I do that tiering exercise and I figure out who's in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, like, who should I target first? And that's where I really use some of the signals like funding or a new VP just got hired or, previous user just, came onto that company. That's how I determine who to target first. And that's kinda how I think about it is if I have 50 tier 1 accounts then, instead of just randomly picking an account and be like, "Oh, I'm gonna start with Acme," I might as well start with one that has some, like, more warm intent to it and has some, like, positive signals behind it. Just think about if you went fishing, don't just choose a random lake, you'd wanna choose a lake that there's a bunch of fish swimming around and you're more likely to catch one. So it's kinda my way of, like, getting lucky per se.
Mm. I love that. Yeah. And it is just kind of like if you think about it like a funnel, it's like the first step of the funnel is this tiering exercise. You're like narrowing things down from your book. And then like the next you're narrowing it down even further by looking at the warm intent signals. And then there's probably some signals there that give you an even smaller subset of accounts to focus on. Like I only want to look at the accounts that have, had more than like 2 opportunities already and they, recently raised funding, so there's, like, a compelling event for me to reach out for.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a great point that, like, not all signals are created equal. Meaning, if somebody has bought Gong before and joins Acme, that's an amazing signal. Like, I should reach out to them right away. I should do something really creative. They probably love us. I want to keep them in the family type of thing versus like if somebody at that company that's lower level viewed our blog page, I wanna be aware of that. That could show some intent, but that's not a hand raise that's like, "This is a great fit. They're ready to buy. They're ready to move forward." They could be in more of the exploratory phase or even identifying if they have a problem worth yet investing in. So, it's important to take that lens as you look through those different signals.
Yeah, and I love how you're just thinking about it, like, all of these signals can feel overwhelming, but you have to break down the logic of it. It's like, why should I focus on that job switcher signal? There's, like, reasoning behind why you would prioritize that signal over a different one. And so trying to like categorize your signals, it sounds like is a good step for reps to take, and really understand what that signal means, not just chasing the signal because it's a signal and you think that it's going to be helpful for prioritization.
Yeah, perfectly said.
Um, That's awesome. I wanna talk a little bit about, some other steps of the process that we had identified, like, research is a huge part of your process. So, tell me a bit more about what are the things that you make sure you know about an account before jumping onto that first call, and, like, why is that so important, and what are some strategies that you've applied to make that process a little bit easier?
Yeah, there's a lot you wanna know going into a first call. The way I think about it is like, there's no hawk signal, then, somebody willing to take a first meeting with you, right? So, like, you wanna make sure you're set up to absolutely maximize every single deal in pipeline. for me, I'm probably looking across like 15 to 20 different things. So many that I actually built out like a pre-call prep template for myself. Because what I found beforehand is if I was looking at Pocus as an account, if I had an upcoming demo, like I'd be kinda doing my prep thinking like, "Oh, what do I need to know next?" Like, "Have they ever spoken to us in the past?" Or like, "Who's Sandy's boss that I might wanna be aware of their name?" And I was kinda disparately trying to piece together like an entire puzzle. So instead, I built out a template for myself of like, "Hey, these are the 15 things I wanna know going into any first call." And that can kind of stop thinking about like, "Hey, what information do I need to know?" And just kinda go through it in the form of like a checklist or like a research exercise instead. Some of the main things I wanna always understand is like, "Hey, have we spoken with that account before?" If I have a first call of focus, like, it would be really important for me to understand, have we ever spoken to Sandy in the past? If we did, why did they not move forward? What was their business case? What were some of their challenges? Or conversely, like, is this the first time we're ever speaking to them? Like, what information should I know going into that conversation that maybe a previous rep or team member has had a conversation with? Outside of that, I definitely wanna understand a bit around, like, the org chart. So, I map out, "Hey, in our typical evaluation, these are the 4 or 5 personas that are typically at play should the evaluation go well." So, I might wanna write out the chief revenue officer's name, the VP of sales name, the head of marketing's name, just so I can be aware of all of those individuals, how long they've been at the company, if they've ever been at an org that might have used us in the past, some of that information. And I think most importantly, like building up some form of point of view around that account today in terms of some of their priorities that they might be focused on. Forgetting about your own solution is like, what are they marching forward towards in 2025 that you can find in terms of what's on their website or Google News? Did they acquire a company recently? Did they launch a new product? Are they going into a new industry? Be aware of some of those priorities and goals because if you can attach yourself to existing company level objectives, that's a really great way to drive urgency and a compelling event from the beginning of your cycle, versus just pigeonholing yourself to something more broad, like, oh, you're focused on building pipeline or closing more deals. Like, of course, every organization is, but that's probably not a reason for you to invest, tomorrow in something like this.
Mm. I love that point about having that clear POV before you go into the call. And it's so obvious why, because if you go into the call not knowing those things, the call can, like, kinda meander around a bunch of different places. If you have that crisp perspective of, like, "Here are the reasons why I think they might buy tomorrow, and these are the priorities," then you can guide that conversation a little bit better. So logically, my next question is, you know, how does that research then tie into the way that you do discovery?
Yeah, so I always wanna formulate that point of view, and that's probably where I'll spend the most time. I'm trying to figure out, like, 2 or 3 bullet points of priorities that I can basically lead off and insert my pre-call prep at the beginning of the call. I think sellers do a good job prepping for calls, but then they show up with Sandy, and they don't really show off that like, "Hey, I put a lot of work into this meeting, like, I understand your business, I think I understand some of your objectives," like, call it out from the onset, like, "Hey, Sandy, I was super excited to speak with you and focus ahead of today, I did my research, here's what I learned, X, Y, and Z, like, curious to hear from your perspective, like, which of those you're most focused on this year?" Like, that's a way better question than just like, "Hey, Sandy, like, what keeps you up at night?" Or, "What led you to take today's call?" Or, what are your top 2 priorities where you're gonna get a more boring answer like revenue or leads or, increasing awareness? So I think, like, the takeaway is the more thoughtful question you ask, the more thoughtful answer you'll get, and if you ask a really boring, mundane question, you'll get a very boring, mundane answer from it.
Yeah, so it's just like that depth of conversation is gonna be so much better if you are leading with those priorities and spending time on the POV. How long are you spending on, like, developing that POV? And are you developing that POV only for tier 1 accounts, or are you extending it beyond that?
Every deal, I wanna come in with a perspective. The key is that it doesn't have to be perfect and it doesn't have to be right. But showing you did your research and your homework will get you to the actual top priority. I'll just make up an example, but maybe I saw that POCUS is launching in Australia for the first time because that was on Google News, your website. I might lead with that as like the top priority and the observation that I'm coming with. And then I can ask a question like, hey, what trumps your expansion into Australia as an even bigger priority for you over the next 3 months?
Mm,
They're much more likely to tell you what their actual top priority and their biggest focus is when you lead with some research. They're gonna correct you, and they're willing to, but versus you just asking, "Hey, what are your top 2 to 3 priorities?"
mhm. That was a good, hypothetical because we sometimes joke internally that we should include Australian in our ICP, because some of our favorite customers like Canva and Dumbtail, Australian, and we always have great luck with Australian companies. Um, Obviously can't be our actual ICP, but, you know, maybe it's a signal that a company is more likely to buy POCUS if the decision maker is Australian.
We'll add that to one of the signals.
Yeah. Um, I could go even deeper. I know we only have a few minutes left, so I wanted to ask some rapid fire questions. I think one thing that I hear a lot is, especially from reps, they want to use tools to like make things faster in their workflow, especially using things like AI. But it can be intimidating. What's some advice that you have for reps who are trying to streamline things with AI?
Just start, give it a go. You're always gonna be bad at anything the first time you try it typically, but you'll get better. I think with AI, don't just ask it like one question, like, and then exit the browser, like have a conversation, refine it, work on it, like kind of have a back and forth dialogue.
Yeah. Are there any like things that you use it for religiously now that you would never go back to doing manually?
Yes. I use Claude a lot by Anthropic. I like ChatGPT as well. Claude's just a little bit easier to organize, but I have like a one-page business case in terms of the format that I like to build out for one pagers. And then I can upload some of my call notes from conversations. And it takes basically all of my call notes and it formulates it into that one pager business case, which in the past took me a couple hours sometimes to write and kind of create a narrative behind. So having AI take a first stab at that just from what's actually been said in conversations already, and then I can go through and make some edits.
Yeah, that's definitely, like, one of my favorite cheat codes for any meeting, actually, like, uploading the content and just giving Claude or ChatGPT a structure of what you want the output to be. I think it does such a good job. And I think it's also really good for follow-up emails as well. It can be good for initial emails, but I think, you need a lot more context, and so making sure that the AI has that context is usually the key.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, we're right at time, Brian. This like went by so fast. I think we could continue chatting for another hour or so. And but I know that you do this as a business. So where can people find you? How can they get more advice from you and maybe get some of those templates you were talking about?
Yeah, so you can always give me an ad on LinkedIn. You can just search my name there. Or my website closed1.xyz. I have different free resources on there with things like a mutual success plan and email templates and an interview guide as well that I create in some of my off hours for other sellers that are looking to up level, find a job, or anything else as well. So
Amazing. I will link those resources in the follow-up email we send to everybody, but appreciate you, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you everybody for listening in and we'll be back next month. Bye y'all.